Okay, stop, look, go. What does that mean? Well, I borrowed the title today from a TED Talk by my favorite teacher on the art and practice of gratitude, a guy named Brother David Stendal Rost. There he is, Brother David. Wonderful guy. He was born in Austria, and I mention that because if you've ever heard him speak, he has this thick German accent even to this day, which is actually kind of charming, and it never gets in the way of his message or the clarity of what he has to say. But the interesting thing is as a young man growing up in Austria, he survived the Nazi occupation, which is probably what gave him so much to be grateful for, which is kind of was the impetus for his career focusing on gratitude. And so after he survived the Nazi occupation, he received a PhD in fine arts from the University of Vienna, and after that he came to the United States. His idea was he was going to go to the land of opportunity and become rich. Instead, he became a Benedictine monk. And as we all know, Benedictine monks are all known for their wealth and their riches, right? Sort of a bit of a twist for Brother David, but he did go on to enrich his life with a couple of more degrees in philosophy and theology, and then he became part of the growing interfaith dialogue that was happening back in the 60s after Vatican II. So he was working with people like Thomas Merton and the Dalai Lama, and he's traveled thousands of miles on lecture tours covering 5 continents, I guess, bringing spiritual depth into the lives of thousands of people from all faiths and no faith at all. And his message is simple. His message is very simple. He says that the only religion that really matters is one based on gratitude, generosity, and compassion. That's it. So based on those values, he founded a worldwide network for grateful living. And I've given you the website for that organization, www.gratefulness.org. It's in the handout in your bulletin. I think we have an example of the front page of it there. There it is. Brother David, he's 89 years old, still continues to travel, continues to write books and spread the message that the gentle power of gratefulness can restore courage, can reconcile relationships, and can truly heal the earth. So that seemed like a good topic for the Sunday before Thanksgiving, don't you think?
Yeah.
And Brother David isn't alone in his enthusiasm for practicing gratitude. He has some friends in high places throughout history. For example, the renowned Roman philosopher and orator Cicero said, "Gratitude is not only the greatest of all the virtues, but the parent of all the others." And of course, our co-founder Charles Fillmore, he tells us this. He says, "It has been found by experience that a person increases his blessings by being grateful for what he has." And of course, these words from Meister Eckhart, the 14th century mystic, who once said that if the only prayer you said in your whole life was "thank you," that would suffice. He was branded as a heretic for that, among other things, but it seems like pretty wise advice to me. Brother David's written several books, and one of them is simply titled "Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer." And in the foreword to that book, Henry Nouwen wrote this. He said, "In the midst of a world in which fear, apprehension, and suspicion make us live stingy, narrow, and small lives, Brother David stretches out his arms and says, and smiles and says, 'Love wholeheartedly, be surprised, give thanks and praise, then you will discover the fullness of your life.'" Who wants to live a stingy, narrow, and small life? And yet we have invitations all around us, don't we, to do exactly that. Brother David says that spontaneous, deep gratitude is an experience of joy, a special kind of joy that flows from the simple awareness that whatever we happen to be experiencing in the moment is the result of this freely given gift that we call life. Whether we give credit to God or whether we give credit to nature for this thing we call life, it is no small thing to be born human, and in this realization, that's where we find the root of true gratefulness. During the TED Talk, Brother David asked what I thought was a very interesting question. He asked this: what is the connection between happiness and gratefulness? What is the connection between happiness and gratefulness? And the reason I say it's an interesting question is because I think most people would think that when you're happy, that's when you're grateful. Brother David questions that assumption, and rightly so, because I think we can all think of people who seem to have everything they would need to be happy. People who have all of the material comforts that you could possibly imagine. Wealthy beyond measure, and you don't hear a word of gratitude, much less an expression of joy or happiness. I hate to beat up on Donald Trump, but for all of his wealth and power, and the guy has all the money in the world, or at least so he tells us, for all of his wealth and power, I don't see the guy smile. I never see anything that indicates that he experiences joy or happiness or gratitude. On the other hand, there are people like this man. His name is Manoj Singh. He lives in Calcutta, India. And his life story was featured in a movie that came out a few years ago called Happy. It's the name of the movie, Happy. So I'd like to share a brief clip with you this morning that tells you a little bit more about Manoj Singh. And so we're going to put that up here and listen to it now.
What I hope to do with these little video uploads is introduce you to some of the characters in the film. I want you to meet Manoj Singh because he's a person who impacted me deeply while making this film. He lives in a hut made of bamboo sticks covered in plastic bags in a place where people have been kind of pushed to the edge of society because of their social status or their financial status or a combination of these things. Every day at about 4:30 in the morning, Manoj Singh wakes up, gets on a bicycle, goes into town, and pulls a rickshaw through the streets of Calcutta for 12 to 14 hours a day. And the money he makes is barely enough to feed his family. But what struck me about Manoj is that he was not suffering. He was actually a vibrant, proud, dignified human being who had a wonderful family and lived in a community that in many ways looked healthier than many communities that I see in America. Because what this community had was a real sense of camaraderie and people really looked out for each other.
That's it. Short and sweet. Amazing, isn't it? I certainly couldn't imagine living like that. And I certainly couldn't imagine describing myself as happy if I did. I don't have any categories for it. But I've seen the whole movie, and Manoj is the real deal. That's not a facade that he's putting on. He's genuinely content and happy. And Brother David tells us that people who radiate happiness like that start out by being grateful. Gratitude is what leads to happiness, not the other way around. And again, that kind of makes sense if we think about it, because if you're not grateful for whatever you have, then there can never be enough. Happiness is always down the road. Happiness is always going to happen after the next big thing, whatever that happens to be, and then whatever happens, when that happens, it's the next thing, and it's the next thing. So if we think that happiness makes us grateful, think again. Brother David believes that gratitude is a very unique and important expression. Here's how he puts it. He says that gratitude reveals an expression of our courageous trust that life itself, kind or harsh, happy or sad, is good if only we receive it as a gift. The moment we trust in this truth, we are at peace, and a person at peace will serve as an agent of peace in the world. The key there is courageous trust. That's the key because courageous trust makes gratitude the antidote to fear. And do we ever need an antidote to fear these days, don't we? Especially after what happened in Beirut and Paris last week, over a week ago now. They call the attackers terrorists for one very good reason. They are intentionally trying to terrorize us. They are intentionally trying to create fear and terror, and boy, do we make it really, really easy for them. Once they do their thing, they just have to sit back and give our politicians and news media the opportunity to finish the job for them. Seems like we can't even take a decent amount of time to get to know something about the people who died in the attacks, or get to know something about those who came to the rescue. No, the first thing we have to do is look for a scapegoat. Must have been those awful Syrians. And it's off to the races to see who can talk the toughest about making those terrifying Syrians the reason for our problems, and seeing to it that refugees are put in their place. Forget about the fact that all those attackers were European. All it takes is one little rumor cleverly manipulated, and we end up being the ones spreading fear, terror, distrust, and xenophobia. If you want to see the opposite response, well, I found a Facebook post. It's very interesting. This was posted by the husband of one of the people who was killed in Paris. The husband of a young woman who was killed in Paris. Now, he wrote the Facebook post in French, and they translated it and turned it into the form of a short video. So I can hear the clip I want to share with you here today.
On Friday night, you stole away the life of an exceptional being. The love of my life, the mother of my son. But you will not have my hatred. I do not know who you are, and I don't want to know. You are dead souls. If the God for whom you killed so blindly made us in his image, each bullet in my wife's body would have been a wound in his heart.
You're all right. We're just grateful it's up on the screen.
sound check, it works perfectly, but things like this happen. I'm just grateful that they had the words up there that we could all follow along with, and I'm sorry for those that don't have the video who won't be able to hear it, but go look for Antoine Laris, and you'll find it on YouTube, on Facebook, and watch it again. Watch it again sometime, because I'll tell you what, there's the real power. There's the real power. Sure, go ahead, bomb the ISIS training camps, bomb their military bases, if we can find them. But I don't know about the rest of you. I don't happen to have any bombs personally to drop. So for the rest of us, the real solution is to live like Antoine. Is to live like Antoine. They say the best revenge is a life well lived. So don't let those miserable ISIS barbarians, don't help them by giving them what they want. And what they want is more fear and more hatred in the world. Don't give it to them. Don't give it to them, not in any form. Don't let them dictate the way we live and think. And Brother David, in the face of these kind of things, Brother David is not suggesting that we have to be grateful for everything. In his TED Talk, he makes this very clear. He says this. He says, we cannot be grateful for violence, for war, for oppression, for exploitation. On the personal level, we cannot be grateful for the loss of a friend, for unfaithfulness, for bereavement. But I didn't say we can be grateful for everything. I said we can be grateful in every given moment for the opportunity. And even when we are confronted with something that is terribly difficult, we can rise to this occasion and respond to the opportunity that is given to us by the simple fact of being alive. It's the gift of life itself, not the content. But it takes practice and probably some preparation. We ought not wait for a time of grief or crisis to start the process of practicing gratitude. We need to make it a part of our daily life, which is why Brother David's organization is called a Network for Grateful Living. Grateful living. It's a life practice. So that brings us back to the title for today's lesson. Stop, look, go. It's another idea from Brother David. This is what we were all taught to do as children before crossing the street, right? Everybody had that drummed into their heads. You stop, look, and then go. Well, it's the same method we can use to learn how to practice gratitude moment by moment. Stop, look, go. But as Brother David points out, the problem is that we've forgotten how to stop. We've forgotten how to stop or even pause. We race through life and we forget to pay attention to the seemingly small things that are actually the foundation for grateful living. That's where it starts. And Brother David says that we have to learn how to stop and get quiet. We have to build stop signs into our lives and learn to pay attention to small things. How do you think our friend Manoj in Calcutta would react to having hot and cold running water in his little plastic covered bamboo shack? Just go up and turn a knob and you get hot or cold water. How do you think he'd react? You think he'd take that for granted? Or how about electric lights at the flip of a switch? All those things that we have around us that sometimes we just don't pay attention to, but they're really wonderful in so many ways. Do we ever react at all? Do we stop? Do we look before we start going again? When we stop and look, that's when we create the space for gratitude. We create it, and then we make it a habit. And it just so happens that you've already learned the process today. That meditation that Karen led you through is called a 3-minute breathing space meditation. This is something that we worked on in our meditation class for the past 8 weeks. That was the class that we just wrapped up this last Monday. And the authors of the workbook that we used said that it was the most important practice in the whole process, the foundation for the entire process. And it really does two very important things. First, it's a meditation that we can use to punctuate the day, to insert some pauses into our lives, so that we can more easily maintain a compassionate and mindful stance, whatever comes our way. In essence, it dissolves negative thought patterns before they gain control over our lives. And that can often happen before we're even aware of them, which is why it's important to stop and go through that process of checking our systems. And secondly, it can serve as what they call an emergency meditation. An emergency meditation. It allows us to see clearly what's arising from moment to moment when we're under pressure. We can pause when our thoughts threaten to spiral out of control. Helps us to regain a compassionate sense of perspective. Helps us to be grounded in the present moment instead of wildly off speculating and allowing all the things that crop up from the emotions to overtake us. And the really great thing here is that anyone and everyone can find 3 minutes during the day. Probably more than once during the day, which is really ideal. And we've given you the instructions in the handout that's in your bulletin. And I know we ran out of bulletins today, so if you need written instructions, talk to us and we'll figure out a way to get it to you. If you want to use Karen's guided meditation, guiding you through it, you can pick up a CD of the service afterwards, and the meditation will be on there so you can listen to it afterwards. Use it. Learn how to get quiet. Learn how to stop for a moment so that we can pay attention to the small things that we often take for granted, the small things that are really the foundation for grateful living. Because as Brother David says, it's the gratitude that leads to happiness. Gratefulness is the key to happiness. So, on that note, I want to wish you a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope to see you Wednesday for our gratitude service where we'll practice some more of this. Maybe Thursday morning again as we get out on a beautiful day to walk to stock the closet. And after that, we'll see you next Sunday as we start the Christmas season. Thank you.